Hey, my friends! Happy Sunday. You're probably not seeing this on a Sunday, so I don't know why I said that. But regardless, happy whatever day it is. So you see, you know by the time you're watching this that this is a video about Thoth cards. And what am I doing making a video about Thoth cards? You don't like Thoth cards, Tom Benjamin, and that's true. I am not a Aleister Crowley fan at all. And so what the fuck am I doing? So, that's a great question. I feel like I ask myself that every day. I am not an Aleister Crowley fan, so let's just get a few things off the top of my head, or let's get a few things out into the open. Aleister Crowley was a racist and anti-Semitic person, right? Now, the argument for him is that he was a product of his time. Everyone talked that way, etc. And look what he did, right? Well, what he did was talk that way. You can't separate the art from the artist, so to speak. At least I can't. And so, I don't think you can like overlook that part of him. It's true. Like, I think of RuPaul, right? Like, you can't blame it on the edit if you said it. And I feel like that's what Crowley apologizers want to do, is blame it on the edit. Well, out of context. Well, anything out of context, right? Problem is, by that same token, most of contemporary art, is problematic. So I don't know. In fact, one of the things that I'm going to do... Oh gosh, I was going to do it before this video. Maybe I'll do it now. Fuck it. Why not? So what I was going to do was a reading for myself about, like, how do you reconcile, someone's really nasty traits while using, a product of their work, right? Which is this particular deck. So I was going to do that, just for myself, but why not do it as part of this video? Why not, right? Because here's the thing. While I do not like Aleister Crowley, and while I find most of Western esotericism sort of eye-rollingly pretentious, the art in this deck, these paintings are stunning. And I've always thought that. So, it's just a weird thing. Also, the other thing that I do more and more is that I force myself to work with things that I typically don't like. In this case, esoteric, not necessarily specifically Thelema, or even specifically Golden Dawn, but just sort of broadly esoteric things. And I find them sort of not very useful, and I find them quite dull and unnecessarily complicated. In fact, sort of complicated to a degree of exclusivity. So, but I do, I feel like, it's so easy, so I don't like that, and not to necessarily be able to say why. And so I'm doing a lot of work right now reading through, the Cicero's, if you know the Cicero's, self-initiation into the Golden Dawn tradition. I'm not self-initiating. The initiation ceremonies are just a kind of theater that doesn't do it for me. But I want to understand the Golden Dawn, and their book is long, but it's easy to understand. It's written for people who aren't Western esotericists, right? Like, it's written for dummies, I guess. And then I'm reading through Lon Milo Duquette's book about Thelema, too. Again, the thing I said on Instagram the other day is that I find esotericism to be trickle-down spirituality. It's a self-centered view of the world, specifically Crowley's, where finding, your own sort of spiritual ascension will somehow trigger, change on Earth, right? And to me, that's the same thing as trickle-down economics, right? Like, if the wealthy just, make the most money, it will trickle down. And we know that that doesn't work, and we know that trickle-down spirituality hasn't worked either. These are all, I'm just sort of rambling now. These are all reasons why I don't like esotericism. Still, we're having a thunderstorm right now, so if this doesn't work out, that'll be why. But yeah, a thunderstorm. I don't know if you heard that, but there was thunder, loud thunder. Yeah. So the easy answer is to say, well, then don't work with esoteric stuff, right? And I traditionally don't. But again, in my way of saying, well, let's challenge myself to encounter it and see whether there's anything that I can pull from it that's useful in my readings, that's kind of where we're headed, right? That's why I'm doing this. That's ultimately the reason why I'm doing this, is to be able to say, well, I don't like esotericism, and here's why. But these, the Golden Dawn and Thelema are intricately united because of the relationship of the people who made the two. And they're intricately intertwined with tarot because they introduced tarot to the masses, so to speak, which is really kind of one of the only things they did that I'm kind of grateful for, even though so much of my life has been trying to sort of remove that stuff from my readings. So anyway, let's start with this little reading. How can we reconcile working with a tool created by such a nasty human being? Admittedly, he enjoyed that. He enjoyed that reputation, and I think partly there was a I would say a trauma response to that, but I'm not going to sort of be a Crowley apologist because he's got plenty. And what I'm really more interested in than anything else are the stunning paintings that Lady Frida Harris did. And we see two of my favorite cards in this deck, in this spread, the Knight of Discs and the Tower. I think this is one of the most stunningly beautiful pieces of art ever. It reminds me of German Expressionist theater, which is sort of like a weird thing to find beautiful, but I think it's stunning. And it was inspired by the bombings in London, because this deck was made largely in the years, the later years of World War II. And so the question then is, how do we integrate, and this is the thing that, how do we reconcile working with something created by someone who was a racist, and anti-Semitic, who also was stealing liberally from, India, Egypt, obviously Judaism, and the dialectics of that, right? Dialectics being the fact that two things can be true at the same time. Alistair, thing one being that Crowley was sort of willfully an asshole, and then the other truth being that this is a stunning deck created by a masterful artist, who I don't think it's enough credit, because the deck wouldn't exist if Lady Frida Harris hadn't pushed to have it made. So we start with the Princess of Discs, which would traditionally be the page. The Knight of Discs would be traditionally the King of Pentacles, and then Truce as the Four of Swords and the Tower. So how I read a box like this, or a cross like this, is really just in terms of relationships. So I'm going to look at the Princess of Discs in relationship to the other three cards, but I'll also look at the other three cards in relationship to each other. Starting with the Princess of Discs, what we're dealing with is, a curiosity, a spirit of curiosity. Now, I'll say too that I'm not reading this deck the way that a Thoth reader would do, because I am not interested in that. What I'm interested in is finding my own way to work with these tools. So the Princess of Discs, or the Page of Discs, is it's just, there's curiosity about life, right? We need answers to life's questions. And in a way, the Princess of Discs, or the Page of Pentacles, is kind of the diviner, is kind of the fortune teller, is kind of the person saying, well, gee, what is happening in life? And the Knight of Discs, as kind of a king-knight hybrid, what I do when I read the kings or the knights and the princes in Thoth-type decks is that I consider them in terms of, there are some retentions of the knight that stay with the knight, like their action, right? Whereas the prince is going to be more evocative of the entitlements present in the king. But the prince still is sort of younger, I guess. So the Knight of Discs is an interesting pairing because we're curious, and then we're going to go find out what happens, right? And so the first thing I think this is saying is, look, people need answers to life's questions, and whatever tool you use to get there, as long as it gives them answers, is the practical thing to do. It's the practical tool to use. So I think we're starting by saying, well, look, you know what I mean? It's just a tool to answer questions. Just with these two combinations, this first combination. Let's do this way now, this cross here. So we have the Four of Swords and the Tower, which are really very opposite in a lot of ways. The Four, of course, being very still and somewhat conservative and, conservative thinking, and then the Tower comes along and says, plow, fuck that conservative thinking. And so to me, this is sort of doing exactly what I said I was trying to do, in this long preamble to this video, which is that you got to challenge your preconceptions. The Four of Swords being preconceptions and the Tower being the challenge, and in forcing yourself to approach things that you dislike, you may find perception shifts in there. Looking at other combinations, the Princess of Discs and the Four of Swords, is sort of like, oh, I've been thinking the same way for a long time. I'm curious if there's anything else, and the Tower says there is actually. A lot, and you should go look for it. In the same way, we can look at, oh boy, I'm curious about what it would be like to blow everything up, and actually it'll bring you some sort of clarity. The Four of Swords, in this case, serving a slightly more positive purpose, and carrying the Knight of Discs is carrying this sort of intellectual rigor, this stability of the Four with him as he goes into the Tower, into the sort of quake, into the shake-up, which says to me, look, you're gonna face some pretty crazy stuff, but you're not unprepared for it, and so it's really a journey. It's about exploring, and that's what knights do. And so, I think ultimately what this reading is about is, look, a divination tool is a tool, and what you do with it matters more than the person who made it and their intentions. Now, this is what the reading seems to be saying to me, right? Like, could that just be rationalization? Yes, but I'm a pretty good reader. You know what I mean? And so, again, is that a good answer? No, but it's the answer to the question, right? I didn't ask, should I be working with this deck? I said, how do we reconcile, or how do I reconcile working with this deck with the reputation and the things that Crowley said and did? And it's saying, look, whatever if you're about helping people achieve perception shifts, who cares what you use, sort of, you know what I mean? Which is a simplistic and very privileged answer, but is that coming from the deck? Is that coming from me? Is that coming from I don't know. That's one of those. That's one of the things that divination does, is it raises often more questions than it answers. But I found this deck to be pretty good at telling me the truth. Particularly after I've gone through the thing. So anyway, so I hadn't planned on doing that, but there you go. Very stuttery today. I think it's the weather. I think it's, anyway, the point of this video is not to read or even to talk about Crowley necessarily. It's to talk about the different editions of the deck that I've been sort of discovering accidentally. So the version that I have had the longest is not in front of you, but it's the standard version of this deck. The box looks almost the same. I think my printing was a little more recent than this one. But it was the AGM, and I specifically stayed away from the US Games version because I had heard that it was less well printed. So and then I had that for a long time, and then this edition came out, which was a US Games limited edition that came in this nice box with a hardbound book, and this deck, which was a gold gilded edition. And I had heard somewhere that this was not a very popular printing of the deck. But it looked exactly like my small version. So I thought, oh, maybe that's just a taste situation, right? So anyway, when I prefer the large size of this deck because there's so much beautiful painting in it. And so I started thinking, well, I'm going to work with this one, but I didn't want to damage it because it was a limited edition. And even though I don't really care about that much, I do, it like one day I want to sell it, right? Whatever. But so I ordered this, which is the current US Games printing, and thought, oh, it's probably the same as this because this was one people didn't like, and people don't like the US Games one, so maybe this is the same as this without the gilding. If you're staying with me, and it's not. So this is the current US Games printing, and it happens to be in order. And I immediately noticed, this is not in order, sadly, because you just saw me shuffle it. I immediately noticed how washed out the colors looked. The Magician or the Magus is like one of the best ways of showing it, right? So this on the right was the US Games version that I just got a few weeks ago. And then this on the left was this limited gold edition that looks exactly like the old AGM I have, but without the gilding. Or this one's gilded. So I saw this and thought, oh, this is interesting. It looks kind of bleached. You know what I mean? And one of the cards that's easiest to see the difference on is the Hierophant. Let me zoom in. So you can see on the left that there's a lot more color detail. On the right, it's pretty shockingly monotone. So I was really disappointed with this one. And I said, oh, no wonder no one likes the US Games version because it's washed out. So concurrent to this, I have to make sure I don't get these confused. Concurrent to this arriving, I started to see this showing up on sort of non-US shops. So this is the new AGM edition. And I can't believe, if you're still with me on this video, I give you credit because this is nuts. So this is the new AGM edition, and so my thinking was, oh, maybe it's this, right? Because the US Games version is not that. So I thought it would be another copy of this without the gilding. So I got this ordered from the UK. It's not available in the United States because there's some whatever licensing with the ODO and the publishers. So AGM has like Europe and US Games has the United States. So I got this. This has been shuffled. It's not in order. And I was like, oh, wait. When I was comparing it to this, I'm like, no, this is washed out. This is the washed out one. So what I realized is this is the exact same thing. This AGM version is the exact same thing as the current US Games print. So they're identical. In fact, the backs are both the same. So you can see they both have a brown border on the back and no copyright, which will delight, I think, many people who hate the copyrights. So if you get the current US Games print, it's going to be the same one as this current AGM print. It's identical. Print quality may differ a little bit. I think that it's just a natural part of the printing process. Let's just show you the two Magicians side by side. And you can see they're pretty much the same. So rather than being just a washed out bad print, this is just the current print for U.S. Games and AGM. So why? Why is this washed out? Well, the U.S. Games box is the old box that it always had. I don't know if that will change at any point, obviously. But the AGM box does actually give you some clues. For this new edition, making a mess. For this new edition, the colors of the card images have been matched to the original paintings as faithfully as possible. So, now the questions that I have, right, just as a curious person, are, well, when were the paintings photographed or rephotographed, right? Because they are not apparently in great shape. They need to be conserved, right? So is this a recent rephotographing of them? I don't know. Does it reflect what they looked like in the 40s, or does it reflect what they look like today? These are questions I don't know the answer to. Anyway, I don't think I would have minded this version if I hadn't gotten so used to this version. So this is lovely, and I think for purists, you may find this a better version. And it's good to know, I guess, that it doesn't matter whether you live in the United States, both versions are coming with this deck and you can tell the difference because of the round borders, but also because of this book. This book, look, came with both of them. I'm trying to keep things straight. So, that's the tea on those. So the current printing that you can currently get from the two licensed distributors of the Thoth deck are this new, supposedly truer printing. It is not a bad printing. It's just that I've grown so used to the rich, like hyper-saturated cards that I just was sort of shocked by how washed out these looked. And to me, they do. And that would be, a thing that makes sense, I guess, if you're used to an oversaturated version. Now, I don't have any of the historical versions. I don't have a greenie. I've never seen a greenie in person. That's actually not true, but I just don't remember what it looks like. When I was just sort of popping around the internet looking for things, I found this, which is supposedly a vintage edition, but it's not, but it is. So this is what I now know to be a bootleg, thanks to the intrepid research of a friend of mine. And I had a feeling it was a bootleg because the printing quality is absolutely terrible. It looks like it was printed from a green deck. I don't like calling it a greenie. I don't know why. I just find that sort of uncomfortable. The cardstock is terrible. It's super thin. And you can see it's even, like, it really is washed out. And this is a bootleg, apparently. So the way that I found this out was I was chatting with a friend of mine. And, I said, I think it might be a bootleg, but it doesn't, I don't really see bootlegs of the Thoth deck that much. But I said, it says cards and booklet printed in Colombia. And there were never editions of this deck that were printed in Colombia. It's always been Belgium. And so this turns out to be a bootleg, but a bootleg that was used in countries where you couldn't get copies of the actual deck for, political or religious reasons. So this is sort of a weird curio of bootlegging history. The back looks quite nice, actually. This is what the original backs more or less looked like. But I have no idea what I'll do with this. It wasn't expensive, but it was more expensive than it should have been for what is essentially, a fraud, and yet sort of with a weird and interesting history. And so what are these two? Well, these are two prior printings of the deck that more closely match the one that I'm used to. And these are the prior AGM and US Games, and they too are identical. Now, I can't tell you what year these were printed, because what you get on Etsy is not always necessarily what you get on, what you get in real life. Copyright dates don't necessarily matter, because that doesn't necessarily mean that's when it was printed. Like the copyright date on this is 1944 and 1962. 1962, I think, is when the original first printings of the deck came out. But however old this deck is, it is this version, more or less. This one's a little bit darker. And so is this. So this is another recent printing of the Thoth, and it's pretty much the same thing. Let me find the Hierophant again. So what I now know in this very strange video is that U.S. Games and AGM for the last, however, probably 20 years, if not more. Actually, probably much more, because 20 years ago is a lot more recent than I used to think it was. And I've been doing this for much longer than 20 years now. So anyway, these I found on eBay. They too cost more than really they should have. But what I was trying to do is figure out what the hell was going on. And which was the one I wanted to stick with, and then because these have now been replaced by this new printing, I wanted just to make sure that I had a version of this that I could mess around with that wasn't going to get damaged, and so now I do. And because I am 100% a freak, I also managed to get my hands on this with gilding, which is another copy of the what was called the Gold Edition, before U.S. Games put out this cloth box. And that one I think comes with a German book, but I think the titles are in English. But I don't know, I've weirdly grown attached to the gilding now, because who the frick knows with me? Because I'm nuts. But anyway, so this is the one that I prefer. The more I look at the new one, the more it grows on me. And there are some cards that I think look better in this version than in this version. They're more subtle and nuanced. This can be very, very oversaturated. But again, I like more of the cards in this version than this one. Again, mostly because I have gotten used to it, just from looking at it over the years. So the good news for folks who are curious is that this version actually is available in the US if you buy the current US Games version. And I got this, I didn't buy this right from US Games, I think I got it off Amazon. This I had to get on eBay. It was more expensive, and the shipping obviously cost a lot more from the UK. But it was there. There are 3 sizes of this. I think there are 3 sizes of this too. So it's the same printing. Right, only the box is different. This is obviously a much more exciting box design. I love the kind of like modern font on it. But anyway, I guess the other thing I'll share is just, what am I doing beyond that? So I've been reading. I mentioned I've been reading Lon Milo Duquette's book about Thelema, The Magic of Aleister Crowley, or something like that, and just really to get, a sense of what Crowley's deal was. Spiritually, I still, the more I learn, the more I find it sort of annoying. And also the Cicero's Golden Dawn, the self-initiation into the Golden Dawn. And again, that's just to understand the Golden Dawn, spirituality a little bit, again, for context. I've also read Duquette's book on the Crowley Tarot, on the Thoth Tarot, which I'd read years ago, and it's pretty good. I think that's probably the gold standard. I actually liked this one more by Michael Osiris Snuffin. I just found it a little more about tarot and a little bit less about Crowley. But the thing with this book, and if you listen to the Fortune's Wheelhouse podcast, is everything to this guy is a dick. Literally, like, everything is a phallic symbol. That aside, I found it a more interesting read. And then I've sort of been slowly looking at this one too. This is not really specifically about the Thoth deck, although it uses the Thoth deck. And then the Fortune's Wheelhouse podcast as well. And then at some point I'm going to do a comparison video between the Thoth Tarot and other Thoth decks I've got, primarily the Tabula Mundi and the Maria. This is the Maria, which is this was self-published, and actually it's on sale. So this is gorgeous. This is stunning as well. So I'll just compare them for shits and giggles, and I think that's it. I think that's everything I wanted to just talk about. So That's my weird Thothy rant. It always happens that my SD card runs out with minutes to spare. Anyway, what I was saying was thank you for joining me on this weird Thothy ramble. Hope you enjoyed it. If nothing else, enjoyed my weirdness. Take care, be good, and I'll have more videos soon. Bye!